Hey programmers, what is going on? I'm the Savage Coder and this is episode 39. I've been away for a little bit, but now I'm back. I was ready to come back, but after a little break, I got the COVID, so that kept me out of the game for a little while longer, but doing better and wanted to keep on sharing what I know. So this week, we're all about middleware and the examples of both middleware and some extension methods. And we'll talk about the pipeline, and we'll talk about how to protect your API with an API key. All that coming up right all right, so I lied. It wasn't right now, but it is right now. So let's talk about middleware. So when you request something from a web server, you make a request to that server and the code runs on the server. Well, you can tap into that request before it gets to your code. And there's a whole pipeline that happens, and it happens in order, and one piece of middleware that runs in that pipeline will hand off to the next piece of middleware. And after you go through all of your pieces of middleware, then you're going to eventually get to your controller after it goes through routing. And so you can kind of tap in beforehand in what we call the request pipeline. In addition to that, after you're done and you're returning things to a user, you can again tap into that response pipeline and you can modify the response that's going back to the user. You can add your own headers, you can do whatever you want to that data afterwards. So these things can be really handy. In today's example, we're going to implement an API key requirement, but just for one controller. And you could do this just for one action. You can do it for as many things as you want. We're just going to say that this is going to be a controller that's protected. If you don't have an API key and you don't send it in the header, then it's going to give you an unauthorized, a 401. So before we get into that, let's take a quick look at how the pipeline looks and where you tap into those things. So in our code that you can get on GitHub here, the link for GitHub is in the description. If we go to the startup.cs file, and let me make this bigger so you can see some of this. That's really big, so you can definitely see it. So if you look in startup, there's two methods that get called. One is configure services, and the other one is configure, and both of these will get called by the .NET Core or .NET frameworks if you're using .NET Framework, and these all happen because of this use startup, and it names the class startup, and so this class gets searched for, and those two methods will get called. If you look inside each of these methods, things happen in a certain order. So for instance, the services collection, the iService collection, gets injected into this call, and then we can do things with the service pipeline. So here we're adding the ability to handle cores. So we can put what origins are allowed, and if there's any certain headers, this one's allowing any header. Oops. Don't do that. And after that, we set up some app settings that are being read from our appsettings.json, and those will get read into a strongly typed model. And this is the model. And when we need those, we can inject an iOptions into wherever we need them and get access to those settings. And we already have a video that explains how to do all this, where I actually did these. Bing! After that, we're setting up authentication with JWT bearer tokens. It's been a really popular subject for this channel, so if you want to learn how to require a JWT token, and you can look through this series of videos on that are under the videos in this channel. And then, so it goes through all these different things. It registers certain singletons and things like this. After that, it goes into configure, and we pass in the application builder and the web host environment, and we add things here to the pipeline here. So here's where we actually plug in all of that cores that we set up top. Right, so we set up the service and the policies up here, and then we actually add it into the pipeline down here. So here we're adding the authentication into the pipeline. We're adding the routing into the pipeline and things like that. So here's where you can pick where your pipeline extension will go, and it will execute in this order, and each of these will in turn run after the previous one is done. So if you notice, I can type app here, and if I hit dot, if I wanted to create something that was maybe called like use API key, because we're going to require an API key to get to this controller, I can't just type use API key. And the reason is because this app right here is an iApplication Builder, and only methods that are in iApplication Builder will be available after this app. You'll also notice from time to time that you can download a NuGet package, and they'll say, oh, just add app dot whatever's in that NuGet package, and that's how we insert into the pipeline. So the way we do that is with an extension method. And so I'm just going to comment this out for now. We're going to do a simple extension method so that you can see how all that works, and then we'll apply that so that our use API key works. So I'm going to right click my project. I'm going to go to add a new folder, and we're going to call that extensions. And for this example, because I don't have a need for anything specific, and this is just example purposes, I'm going to create a string extension. So I'm going to make a new class. I'm going to call it string extensions. And the idea here is that I'm going to extend a string so that I can write something like, you know how we can say if this allowed origins is just a string variable that I defined up here at the top. So if I said if string dot is null or white space and put that in there, you would understand what that meant, right? I'm checking whether or not this has anything in it or not. You know, is it null or empty space, or is there a value in it? And so that makes perfect sense. But what if I didn't want to type string dot is null or white space? What if I just wanted to take any string and I wanted to say dot is null or white space, open close paren, right? So I can't do that because this data type of string does not have an is null or white space. Well, that's what we're going to add. We're going to extend the string class and add a method is null or white space, and that's what we're doing in our string extensions. So first thing we got to do for an extension class is the class must be static. That's a requirement. The next thing we want to do is we want to make our method. So we're going to make a public. It is also static. And it's going to return a Boolean of is null or white space, right? And then we have our method body. Well, we need a couple of things to pass into this method because we're going to be working on the value of the string itself. In other words, when I call this method is null or white space, I need this value allowed origins, because is null or white space has to inspect the contents of this variable, this string, in order to know if it's null or white space. So rather than require you to kind of repass it in, that doesn't really make sense to read it that way. And so with an extension method, we have access to the string itself that called the method. And the way we define that is with this string. And you can name the variable anything you want. I'm just going to call it source. because to me that's like the actual string that we're working on, what we want to inspect. So source inside this method is actually going to be the value that is stored in this allowed origins variable, which in our case is going to be underscore allowed origins, right? Okay. And then inside this method, this one's really easy because it's just an example. And I'm just going to say return string.isNull or white space, and I'm going to look at source. So I'm kind of reusing this isNull or white space to get the value of my Boolean based on what's passed in here. But now I'm extending the string with this method. So if I come back to my startup where I had this, if I hit Alt Enter to get my IntelliSense, or if you have the little light bulb here, notice now it's offering me to use my Savage Cell API.extensions namespace. That's the one we created right here. So if I bring that using in to the top of this file, then we're fine. And we can now use this on any string in any class as long as we bring that using in. So you can see how we can take a class, in this case string, and we can extend it with a method. Well, we're going to do the same thing with this application builder so that we can do use API key. And just like we had our string inside here as source, we'll get our application builder inside our method there. So hopefully that makes sense. I'm going to comment this if out, and we'll leave that in there. And so I'm going to uncomment this. There's nothing there now. In other words, if I click on that and hit Alt Enter, it says, I don't know what you're talking about. Do you want to make a new variable for this unknown thing? It doesn't really know what to do. Okay, so the next thing we want to do before we actually create this extension is we want to add our API key to the app settings and be able to bring that in. So let's go ahead and go into our appsettings.json. I'm going to go below the Serolog entry and hit a comma. And in here, we'll just call this admin settings. We're going to create an admin controller. And so these settings will represent any settings we need and values we need when dealing with our admin controller. In this case, I'm going to make an array called API keys. And that's going to be an array type. And for now, we're just going to put 1, 2, 3. We'll make it nice and easy. So when we call the admin controller, if we don't pass an API key with the value of 1, 2, 3, we want to deny that call and give a 401 unauthorized back. So I need to make a class called admin setting with a property called API keys. All right, so let's do that. Let's go into our models. We already have some settings classes here. I'm going to right click, add class, and we will call this admin settings. And we will have a public. We'll have a public, and we'll need to store those in some kind of a list. So a list of string. And we'll call that API keys and get set. And I will bring in Alt Enter and bring in the using for collections.generic. And so the idea is that this list of string in this property will hold all of our array values, and we can comma separate, right, new values in there that it requires. And the only other thing to do is to go into startup now. And up here where we're reading in the rest of our settings, we want to register, and I'll just copy that. So we want to register for our admin settings. So this says go into that appsettings.json, look for a section called admin settings, which we have right here. And once you get that, we're going to call this the admin settings section. So that's actually grabbing like this whole thing right here, the whole section. It won't have the Serolog section. It'll just have the admin section. And we will pass that whole section into services.configure, and we want to tell it that there is an admin settings class that will hold the values that you find in that section. So that as long as they match, then we're golden, and they do match because there's an API keys that holds a list, and in our app settings, there's an API keys that has a list. And you could make that, by the way, you could make that a string array here if you don't want to work with a list of string. I just prefer the list. Okay, the next thing that we want to do is actually create our controller that we need to protect. So I'm going to right click add, I'm going to select controller, and I'll select API under common and an empty API controller. And we're just going to name this not values, but admin. And you kind of figure this admin controller would have some things that only an admin could get to. And so let's make a simple HTTP GET method, and we'll just make it public. It will return an iAction result, and we'll just use GET. And we're just going to return an OK, and just so that we know that it works, I'm just going to put admin, I don't know what it's called. And let's go back to startup and comment out our error right now, this use API key, because we haven't created that yet. But let's go ahead and test our, I always like to run it and make sure our admin controller works. If you forget this HTTP GET, that would fail. So there's things that we do a lot that, we end up forgetting to do. So here's our admin controller. If we try it out and hit execute, we get back the message admin was called, and we get a 200 back. So I'm going to also open up Postman. And the reason that I'm going to do Postman is because I want to hack in some extra headers once we get this API key requirement. Our API is on HTTPS on port 44328. You can check yours in your Swagger. Your port will probably be different than mine. And then we will... Let's get those... Let's get rid of those. And I'll go into here, localhost 44328/API/admin. And if I click send, we get admin was called. So now you can see admin was called, and we got a 200 OK status. So really good, but we don't have a header here that says there's an API key. So it's working, but it's working for everyone. We haven't locked it down yet. So let's go ahead and add in some middleware. So I'm going to right click my project. I'm going to add a new folder, and we'll call it middleware. And this is where all of our middleware could go. We're only doing the API key middleware in this instance, but you could put folders in here and separate your middleware out. So in this case, I'm just going to make some middleware, and we're going to call this one the use API key extensions, right? And so this will have any extension classes in it you need to register in your startup.cs. So just like we did for the string, this class has to be static. And then we will make a public static method, right? In this case, it's going to return an application builder, and we're going to call it use API key. That's what we said we wanted to call it. And then just like we did for the string, well, let's go back to iApplication Builder, Alt Enter, and I'm going to add the using for Asp Net Core.builder. And inside here, we just like we did the string, we'll say this, but where we, in our string extension, the data type for this was string, ours is going to be that application builder. So I want to say application builder, and I'm just going to call this builder. That's kind of the standard nomenclature for building middleware. And so this only does one thing. This says return the builder dot use middleware, and then inside the generics here, we have to tell it the name of a class that's going to implement whatever use API key is supposed to do. So we're just going to register a brand new class that we haven't written yet, and we're just going to call that use API key. Right? That's the guts of what this use API key extension will do. So inside my middleware, again, I'm going to add another class, and this class is just going to be called use API key. So when we register a class with this use middleware, it's automatically going to be looking for this use API key to have some certain methods in them. So we have to stick to that almost like an interface in order to respond to the methods that it needs to call. So we're going to make a public async task, and it's going to be called invoke async. It's going to take in an HTTP context called context. All right, so why do we need this method? So first off, we can alt enter on task and bring in system.threading.thread, and then we can alt enter on HTTP context and bring in our Asp Net Core.http using statements up here. So why do we need this? Well, first, use middleware is going to call this method inside this class. And so this has to be there. It's going to pass in the HTTP context. The context has things in it that we need, like the request and the response. If we look at context, right, it has the request, it has the response. If you want to get to the headers, inside the request, there's request.headers. So we have access to the whole context of our call to do with it what we want. And so we need to set up something else here so that we can kind of control that invoke async. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to make a constructor. So I'll type CTOR and hit tab twice. And we want to use some dependency injection. And so underneath our class curly opening curly brace and above the constructor, we need two variables. So we'll make it private read only. And the first one is something called a request delegate. Okay, a delegate is just a pointer to a function. Just think about it as if that delegate represents another method that you can call. And we're going to call that next. And the idea here is the next delegate is a pointer to the next thing that has to be run in the pipeline. So if we come into this method and we decide, hey, maybe this request isn't really calling admin at all, so we don't need an API key for it. We can then say, just go ahead and go on to the next piece of middleware, because maybe it needs to do something with this request as well. And so with that next, you can probably surmise that you got to keep your startup CS middleware in the right order. Because if you come in here and you end up redirecting, you might not even ever get to the next piece of middleware. So you got to make sure that you can handle things and that you're not interrupting the flow of other pieces of middleware. So that's our first. And then we have another read only, and that's our admin settings. We need the actual API key so that we can tell whether the API key is correct. So if I go into Postman and I put in here an x-api-key, which is kind of the standard for calling API keys, and I put in a value of 555, right? We know that our API, our valid API key in our settings is not 555. I put in 123. So we need to be able to pull in 123 from our app settings from the admin section so that we can compare what's in the current header in the context to one of the valid settings in our setting. So I'm going to hit Alt-Enter here and bring in the model. And now we just need to add those to the constructor. So I'm going to hit Alt-Enter on Next, and I'm going to arrow down to Add Parameter. And same thing, Alt-Enter on Admin Setting and Add Parameter. Now, this is not correct, but it's close. So what we need here is actually an iOptions of admin setting. That's how we pick up those sections that we registered in our startup earlier. So we're going to add the using with Alt-Enter for our extension options. And now this is actually an iOptions, so we need to do a .value on that, and that will be our admin setting to store up in this variable. So that's all we need for the constructor. Now we just have to kind of write the logic for our middleware. So what I want to do is I want to say if the context.request.path .value, and then I'll make it, to lower invariant, and .contains. And so what I'm looking at here, and I'll put it in as admin. So what I'm saying here is, hey, when this middleware is invoked, go ahead and look at the request that's coming in. So this would be like from Postman, right? We're going to look at the request and the path. And so if this path has the word admin in it, that's what we're looking at. But I want to take the value for that path and I want to make it 2 lower. So that's going to be lowercase. The whole path, basically this whole path will turn to lowercase. And then we're going to look at that lowercase string of the path and say, does it contain the word admin? So in our case, if we put it from Postman here, the answer will be yes, that'll be true. So now, once we know we're in the right controller, now we can say if context.request.headers.contains key, and we'll do x-api-key. Now, normally I would put that in a constant, but I'm just going to leave that for you to do. Okay, so now we said, okay, we know that our path says admin. Now we're going to look through all the headers because we can have multiple headers in our request. And we want to know, when looking through all the headers, is one of the headers x-api-key? And so it'd probably be a good idea to compare those lowercase, but I'm just telling you that I'm going to send it lowercase here. So I'm not going to worry about that for this example. Okay, so if our header does contain an API key, right? Well, it might not, so let's go ahead and put our else in here. Right, so this is has admin but no API key header, right? And in here it's has admin and API key header, just so we can kind of keep track of it. So now what I've got to do is I've got to go through my app settings. So I really want to say if not my admin settings, right? And this is the settings. What I want to do is I want to loop through all these values, right? Which are in my admin settings.api key is in my model. In this case, I only have one, but we treat it as if there can be many. So I want to say if not admin settings dot API keys, that's our array or our list of string in this case. And I want to know does that API key list contain the value that's being passed in from Postman, right? Which is going to be our context.request.headers of X API key. Let me shrink that down a little bit. Okay, so we know that we have a header called API key, or it wouldn't have gone into this if. So now we're saying grab that value of API key, which in our case is 123, but it could be a comma separated list, right? But contains will take in that whole string, and we will see if that does not exist. So if we have our API key sent in, but our API keys that we read out of our settings doesn't contain that key, then it means it's an invalid key, right? If Postman passed in 555 and our API key has 123, well, that's not a match, so I don't want to let that user in. So I'm going to say context.response. Now I'm writing the response back to the user. I want to say the status code is equal to, and we'll have to convert that to an int, but I want to use the HTTP status code dot, and let's alt enter on that and bring in system.net. And I want to use the not found. And so not found is a 404, but it actually is of an enum type. So in order to get the actual number out of it, we have to cast that to an int, and that'll return the 404 from it. That way we don't have to say status code equals 404. And then context.response, we're also going to write to there the content type, so that our user agent, which could be Postman or a browser or whatever it is, it knows it's going to receive just a plain text message back. It's not JSON or anything like that. And now we're going to await context.response.write async. Write async. And we're just going to write the string not found. And one more time, we will await context.response.complete async. Okay, so that will return our 404. I'm sorry, that'll be a 404, not a 401. Do we want to do a 401? I actually think the 404 is better, right? Because then if somebody sends the wrong thing and they have the wrong key, let them think that endpoint's not even there for them. You could do a 401 if you wanted to. You would just change this to unauthorized and give them a different message back, but the rest of it's the same. In our else, where we don't have an API key, we kind of want to do the same thing. And so really that's the same. And then the last thing we want to do inside this method, like at the very end, is we want to await our next delegate and pass in the context. And so that context will get passed along to the next pipeline, and it will get it'll get sent to its invoke async. So let's go through this logic a little bit, because you might be looking at it going, I don't understand. All we're doing is a couple of not founds here. How is that going to work? So the idea is that let's take this one first. Let's say I'm not calling the admin controller at all, right? I'm calling another controller in here called, I don't know, ping controller, right? So we're calling API/ping, and we're getting back a response that says pong. So does that path contain admin? No, it contains ping. So this would be false, and it would just go, all right, this middleware doesn't even do anything for you. You're not even calling the admin controller. Just go to the next guy in the pipeline. Okay, that works. All right, what if we do call admin, but we don't have an API key, right? Which is what we did the very first time. So does the request, so we know we're in admin, does it contain the API key? No. So if this is false, it's going to go into the else. If you don't have an API key, then I want to say, sorry, not found, 404 error. All right, what if I do send in an API key? Now I'm checking to see, does it have an acceptable API key? Is one of my API keys a valid one? If what I'm receiving from Postman, is that one of the valid ones that's in my configuration? If the answer is no, and that's what this not is, if it's not a valid one, then go ahead and return not found. But if I come in here and it is admin, it has an API key, is it not found? No, it is found. So it's going to exit here. It's not going to go in that if. It's not going to go in this else. It's just going to go and fall through to this await next. So in other words, if the key is there and it's an acceptable key, this middleware doesn't do anything to that call. It just keeps going. And it will eventually fall through all the middleware and call the admin controller. And in the admin controller, we don't need any like authorize or any attribute, nothing special, because we're in the middleware examining and doing things to this call that we don't have to do once we're in the controller. So let's walk through that. Let's go in our startup and add our app.useAPI key in now. And it doesn't know what that is, but if we hit Alt-Enter now, you see we can use the Savage Cell API.middleware, so I'm going to add that using. And now we're good. So I'm going to go into my middleware, and we will put a breakpoint on the, well, we'll put it right there, on line 21, and as soon as it calls invoke async, that's when we'll trap it. So let me hit go. And so it's coming in here once before anything is called. Okay, there was the request actually that just got called that went through here was the request to the Swagger page that launched. So this URL, when it popped the browser, actually ran through our middleware, but because it doesn't have the word admin in it anywhere, it didn't do anything. So that's a good test. So first, let's get our API key out. I'm going to uncheck that. If we look at our bulk edit, you can see the X API key is commented out. If I hit send here, then we're going to come through. Does the path value, which is API/admin, does it contain admin? Yeah, it does. Does it contain an X API key header? Well, it shouldn't because I commented it out. So it doesn't. And so it says, well, then return not found. And then go ahead and call. Notice I'm not returning anything in there. I'm writing something to the response pipeline, but I'm not actually returning because now I want it to go on and call the other middleware that was registered in my startup CS. I don't want to interrupt that. So I'm just going to let it go here. And if we look, we get the message not found, and Postman tells us this is a 404. Just like we wanted. So now I'm going to put my check in the box here, and I'm going to pass the wrong value. Okay. So, did I pass admin? Yeah, I did. Did I pass an API key? Yes, I did. All right. Does my API keys... Oh, my API keys are null. Something is wrong. We have a bug. So I'm going to stop this. I'm going to start it one more time and see if we come in here with any values. No, our keys are null. All right, so we have a bug. So first thing I'm going to do, we'll walk through this together. I'm looking at admin setting, no S, API keys with an S, and an array of 1, 2, 3. All right, let's look at the name of our model. Oh, well, there's one problem. This is admin settings with an S. Okay, so let's fix that right away. Let's go in here and change this admin settings to admin settings with an S. And API keys, let's double check that. API keys, okay. So those match now. Let's look in our startup where we read those in. Here, admin settings. See, it was looking for this admin settings section in the config, but I had it misspelled. So I bet if I start it now, it'll probably work. Let's look at our value here. Yeah, see now it's got the API key 1, 2, 3. So good. Bug fixed. All right. So again, it contains admin. Oh, I'm sorry. This is just the Swagger page that's rendering. Let's actually do, hold on. All right, let's send our Postman call. So do we have admin? Yes. Is there an API key? Yes. Does our API keys of 1, 2, 3, is that contained? Let's look at our headers. Don't know if you can see this in here, but it says there is one. So let's go ahead and see. It says, no, that API key you sent me is not in my array. So the 555 I sent from Postman doesn't match the 1, 2, 3. So it also will return a 404 and drop through and call the next guy, the next pipeline item. And so we get not found again with 404. So let's change the value to a valid value, 1, 2, 3, and we're going to send again. This time I have admin, I have an API key. Is it invalid? No, it is not. So just go ahead and go through the pipeline. Now, if we put a breakpoint actually in our admin controllers get, and I hit go, you see we got called here, and we're going to return admin was called to our caller. Admin was called, and we get a 200 OK. So if we don't have the key or we have the wrong key, it fails. So the other thing you can do here is make better keys. One good way to do that, and just to show you it works now with multiple keys, I'm going to hit a comma and add another quote in there. And I'm going to go under Tools in Visual Studio, and I'm going to go to Create GUID, which popped up on my other monitor for some reason. All right, Create GUID, and I'm going to choose number 4, Registry Format, and I'm going to click Copy. And that will create a GUID with curly braces. I'm going to remove the curly braces. So let me back out of that, back out of that. That looks to me like a pretty good unbreakable API random key. So that could be one client's key. I could have another client's key there. You could store these in a database and load them up, however you want to do that. And so you'll see if I run this, let me, I'm going to disable all my breakpoints and run this. If we go back to Postman and I change from 1, 2, 3 to that nice key, I should still be okay. Yep, admin was called. If I change this at all, and maybe just, make it the wrong or put it, replace the 4 with a 9. Now when I call it, it says, nope, not found 404. So hopefully that was really cool. I love doing this kind of stuff. So we learned how to make middleware. We learned how to, we kind of covered app settings again, which was a nice brush up. And we also learned how to create API key protection for our APIs and extension methods. So hopefully this was a really cool episode that you can take the pieces of that you want and apply them to your project. So let me know if this was helpful. Let me know if you learned something. If you found this interesting at all, please subscribe. It lets me know that you love this content, and then I know what to give you more of. Awesome. So that is that. Let me know if there's anything you want me to cover in these videos, and I will see you soon online.